When we last finished the previous video on this series on Alcibiades 1, Socrates had more or less forced Alcibiades into a corner. So, after some logical reasoning, Alcibiades had been forced to admit that his second retreat, that there is a difference between what is advantageous and what is just, was actually wrong. He was forced to accept from premises and conclusions that the just is the advantageous. And in fact, Socrates clenches this part of the argument by showing Alcibiades that he is in the worst possible epistemic position. So when you think about if you know about some area, so the first division is some people know about something and some people don't know. And out of the ones who don't know, you can make a further distinction between those who know they don't know about an area but are aware of their lack of knowledge, and those who don't know and are not aware of their lack of knowledge, which are the really dangerous ones. And Alcibiades belonged to the second class. He doesn't know and he thinks wrongly that he does know. Because, he is in a worse position because, well, those who know. Those who don't know but know they don't know are at least certain of their state and will not make mistakes based on false beliefs. So Alcibiades has been brought down to this situation in which he is confused and in which he is more or less surrendering himself to Socrates on how to continue this discussion of goals, of how to reach true knowledge, which Socrates was already hinting at would be self-knowledge from the Delian oracle, the Northeast Theoton. So before going further, there's a brief digression in which Socrates, and he is being the spokesman for Plato here, takes a few digs at Athenian contemporary politicians. And so after having shown that Alcibiades is ignorant, Socrates goes, well, it's not specifically a problem with you. All the leaders of Athens right now are also ignorant, including Pericles, who history remembers as the great leader of Athens, the builder of the current marble buildings of the Acropolis, and the master of Athenian democracy in its time of splendor. But Plato is definitely less than impressed by Pericles, who was the ward of Alcibiades. And, well, his argument is that all politicians are just as ignorant about justice and the most important things as Alcibiades. This argument doesn't seem to go in a good direction, though, because Alcibiades draws the wrong inference from it. Like the lesson he takes and he tells Socrates is okay, well, if they are ignorant and still influential, then I, who am also ignorant, am at least as good as they are. And, Socrates pretty quickly rebukes Alcibiades, like, it's not a good thing to be a big fish in a small pond. I mean, remember, one of the things that attracts Socrates to Alcibiades is that Alcibiades is ambitious and able. So what he will do here is try to, how can we say it, is to turn Alcibiades' ambition towards higher goals, yeah, and to turn his big ambition in some way against him. So he asked, do you really want to measure yourself against petty men like the demagogues and ignorant politicians of Athens? If you are truly ambitious, you should use as the measuring stick the greatest people in the world, which for a Greek of the 5th century are, and they are mentioned as such by Socrates, perhaps the great king, the ruler of Persia, the greatest empire in the world at that time, and definitely a massive empire from the Greek point of view, or the kings of Sparta. Sparta was the main Greek city-state, the most powerful one, the one with the strongest army. So those are the ones who should be Alcibiades' peers and the ones he should compete with if he is ambitious. Men who actually possess power, discipline, and education on a level that Alcibiades can only fantasize about. So, this resets the stakes Alcibiades isn't just competing with other people playing in the Athenian sandbox, if you wish. His ambitions require him to compare himself to rulers of kingdoms and empires. And Socrates also means this comparison as a humbling device, because it's patently obvious that Alcibiades, compared to these figures, is, let's say, less than impressive. So, for example, Socrates goes explaining that the Persian great king or the sons of the Spartan kings, they have a better lineage, ancestry, than Alcibiades can hope to have, however proud he is as an Athenian of aristocratic origins. After all, the Spartan kings were presumably descended from Heracles and therefore from Zeus himself. Here also Socrates does make a slightly ironic joke on ancestors, like he himself has noble ancestors because all the Athenians are, well, he is a descendant from some god in some indirect way and so on. But anyway, not only do the kings of Sparta and Persia have a better lineage, they have better discipline, they have better training, they have better education, and they have many more resources than Alcibiades can ever dream of. And, Socrates imagines here a hypothetical scene in which not the kings, but their mothers, the royal mothers of Sparta and Persia, how would they react if they heard Alcibiades' claims of measuring himself up to their sons? And they would just laugh him out of the room. Yeah. So Alcibiades is just a politically untrained Athenian youth, no serious education, possessions that seem puny and poor compared to the estates of Sparta and Persia. So, if his ambition is to flourish, he has to aspire to match or surpass men who have been raised from birth to rule states and empires. So, if he has even the faintest hope of rivaling them, he must first acquire the knowledge that he currently lacks. And the core of this knowledge is the maxim, or one of the maxims of the Delphic oracle: know thyself, nothisi auton. And this becomes now the hinge for the dialogue. So we've been exploring how Alcibiades' ambitions were misplaced in obsessing about gaining power and prestige by ruling, manipulating, advising the assembly. We've reached the stage in which knowledge is required before you can give any effective advice. And Socrates is starting to introduce the idea that knowledge has to be specifically self-knowledge. And implicitly, we have pushed forward the ideas that ambition without this self-knowledge is a delusion, and that, on the contrary, ambition with self-knowledge probably can lead to a path of genuine excellence. So, the message is not pushed through strictly through yet. We get another slight detour. Remember, Alcibiades, whatever lip service he pays to Socrates after some dialectic discussions, is still focused on the idea of politics, on ruling the city, on how he can rule the city, how a good city can be ruled. So they talk now about rulership. Socrates asks what they must work on to be as good as possible. And Alcibiades steers it to rulership. So basically he says being good means being able to rule the city. Okay, Socrates tests this. So what kind of knowledge does a ruler have so that he is able to rule the city? And, Alcibiades goes through a series of dead ends. Perhaps the most interesting one is the claim that the city's preservation depends on friendship and agreement among its citizens. But, Socrates very soon finds the logical loopholes here. Basically, the main issue is that agreements between citizens would require shared knowledge. But the problem we have is that, in the city, some people will have knowledge, some people won't. And as we mentioned before, some of those who don't will know they don't have the proper knowledge, others won't. So if you are predicating the city's preservation on everybody agreeing on shared knowledge so that they can be friends, you are stuck in a rut. Yeah. So, like, if one of the parties in the city politics knows and the other is ignorant, there won't be any real agreement between them. So, Alcibiades again ends in a contradiction. He can't explain what kind of knowledge could produce the agreement he thinks that rulers must create. So, Socrates is again pushing implicitly towards cultivation of the self. So, to begin debating what cultivation of the self could be, perhaps first, one thing that needs to be clarified is what is the self? So, if you want to cultivate the self, you must first have a very clear idea of what self means, which is less than trivial. Yeah. So both Socrates and Alcibiades decide that yes, they're going to discuss how one can improve oneself, and for doing this, we need to know what self is. One first step that they take is, discussing a distinction which Socrates presents. And this distinction is that things that belong to you are not you. And this is pushed through different examples. So, like, shoes belong to the feet but are not feet, rings belong to the fingers but are not fingers. And some belongings, like clothes, belong to your body but are not your body. And all this is pushing in the same direction. Socrates is trying to assert the idea that whatever the self is not the body. And in these chains of comparisons, the body would be like the rings for fingers or like the shoes for feet. They are something that belongs to the self, but is not the self. And here we see one of the differences in this dialogue from maybe what are conventionally considered the early Socratic dialogues, in that Socrates, acting as a mouse for Plato, is introducing here very specific Platonic beliefs, like this idea that humans are a conjunction of soul and body, and the soul is the true self. So, again, the idea that we are taken through with this dialogue is that the self is not the body, the self is rather the psyche, yes, which would be the seat of character, of judgment, and of decision. Yeah. So the argument that basically Socrates develops is that whatever is instrumental to something cannot be identical to that thing. The body is an instrument that the self uses, therefore the self is not the body. And the self would be the soul. Yeah? And this establishes the foundation of the entire self-care project. Yeah? Finally, this section, and we will leave it here for today, concludes with a remark by Socrates in which he pushes forward that he is Alcibiades' only true lover. Why? Well, we mentioned Alcibiades was a handsome young man, aristocratic, well-bred. People were very attracted to him, and he had lovers and pursuers all over the place. But Socrates says, people, these followers of yours, they love your body, which is not yourself, as we've just explained. It's not the true Alcibiades. And because they mistake the body for the person, their love is shallow and obviously will be lost once the body changes and deteriorates. So in this, Socrates presents himself as different from his other admirers. He loves Alcibiades' soul, not his body, and he will remain loyal only as long as Alcibiades keeps having a beautiful soul, that is an ambitious and noble soul, focused on self-improvement through self-knowledge. So this frames their relationship, or their would-be relationship, as a sort of moral and intellectual guardianship of sorts. Okay, we will continue with a video soon developing the arguments on how we can know ourselves.